It's another whirlwind of space updates this week with so much to dive into from all these Starship construction sites that it is, I'll admit, a little hard to know where to start. If you then add in all this excitement about, the mission to send astronauts around the moon for the first time in over 53 years, yeah, I think we're just best to rip right into it. This one is packed.
Okay, Neil, we can see you coming down the ladder now.
Hey, Marcus House with you here, and the start of 2026 is quite the adventure already with all of this new expansion work going on around all three sites. At Starbase, the transformation at the Pad 1 area of the launch site is staggering. It's looking extremely bare now, and with the platforms for the previously hosted deluge tanks now gone, SpaceX were already starting to stack up these rebar cages. What are these for though? It seems a little early to be starting the new flame trench to match the Pad 2 system, right? Well, that is wrong, because just as we had expected as we watched last week, the pile driller, which had been working on the platforms for the 3 new methane tanks within the tank farm, has indeed turned right around and set up here at Pad 1. They put that straight into action, wasting absolutely no time at all, immediately starting to drill holes into the surface. Now, as would probably be expected, this was proving a little difficult at first, with the rebar cages not quite so simple to drop in. Eventually, after 3 tries and re-drilling the hole, they got it to go all the way down. The second pile they attempted also proved to be having the same obstacles, but this time instead of retrying, they just cut the end off the cage and shortened it right into place. They had much more luck though through the rest of the week, getting multiple installed back to back, and all of the rebar cages seemed to be going all the way down with no issue. Looking over here though, hidden within the tower itself, many noticed a stream of sparks flying from within. We could clearly see from above the cooked ends of the main cryogenic lines. Given that the pipes in the new tower are all larger diameter vacuum jacket lines, all this here is being upgraded to match. We had multiple road closures early in the week, with these two suggesting equipment was moving from the port of Brownsville to the pad. Surely it was time for some of that air separation unit equipment to be moved over. The first of 2 storage tanks rolled past the bays on Tuesday morning and then right on down toward the launch site. They took a few tries to get it positioned correctly to then move through the D1 gate where all that wall work is going on right now. They eventually got it through there, and it was soon headed to the middle of the launch site where Shaun was on the scene to find out where they were temporarily going to store them. Well, right here in fact in front of the mega bunker. The same process was underway on Wednesday for the second tank. As always, we super appreciate you being here, liking these videos and being subscribed so we get to be out there with Shaun doing this legwork. We expect these tanks to sit here for a while as they are still working on finishing up the foundations for them to rest on. Before we leave this area though, I would like to bring your attention to this mountain of geogrid. It's the sort of stuff that you would typically see if you're doing a bunch of garden work and needed to help stabilise the dirt or foundation areas. This is certainly important if a future location that it is used will be having heavy equipment on top. You may actually recall seeing this same process back when they acquired the land beside what is now Pad 2 in the corner of the site. Well, check out this map. SpaceX don't seem to be using this geogrid at Pad 1, given that the flame trench pile drilling has already started. What we do know, however, is that SpaceX is currently pending the approval of a gigantic site expansion that would have them almost double the usable land space here at the site. There have also been markers laid out this week in the mudflats displaying this new site boundary, so although speculative, it seems likely that we are about to see this expansion take place starting right now. If so, the work that we have seen so far at the launch site this year is nothing compared to what we are about to witness. Over here at the new Pad 2 rapidly being finalised for the first ever launch of a version 3 Starship, we could see SpaceX's construction efforts in this offload pond. This has recently been seen venting here for the first time, and this week we can see the piping has now been covered with concrete. Down within the trench, we can see them beginning to install some new metal frames, which we suspect will fully cover the pumps for the sump here, which removes the excess water from the bottom of the trench after it has been activated. The water is pumped back up and likely filtered and reused in the water tanks. It has also been an extremely busy week over here for the air separation unit area. This week, the crane was rapidly put together and raised to operating height. The brand new LR1500 beside was also upright and ready for business. This smaller crane is here to assist the much larger LR11000 with unloading the new hardware arriving. Case in point, check out these two brand new tanks installed this week. The first one was delivered on Tuesday, where it was hooked up to both cranes, the LR11000 doing the heavy lifting there, with the smaller crane simply being used to rotate the tank into position. The sun was quickly setting, but we watched them lifting this up and over the big concrete pad that we mentioned last week and right onto that pedestal. The second showed up the next day, and that was installed almost immediately. The weather wasn't too great at the time, but afterward, here is a shot of them both installed. Also arriving were these white skids of hardware that were being stored at the port. These pieces appear to be these two. These were lifted into positions just beside those newly installed tanks. Moving up the road at the Sanchez area this week, all the parts for the third transport stand have been spotted, so what's left is to wait for an area to begin construction. With that in mind, the first of the three looks to be close to completion now, because all that looks to be left is to install some small plates around the circumference of the opening. The second stand is following suit, but it is still missing its clamps, so that has some time left before we get to see that moving about with a ship loaded on top. Further on to the build site at Mega Bay 2, SpaceX looks to be very close to testing Ship 39. On Monday, we saw the first aft flap being lifted in. The second flap was lifted in just a day later, although the work in front of the cameras did get in the way a little, but we could just see them raising that up to the ship. We've had some rough weather recently that has caused a bit of a slowdown on the Gigabay work, but this week it is right back to their mad construction speed. SpaceX has started to install these temporary access bridges across the main centre aisle so that workers can easily cross between. That is certainly going to save them a lot of stair climbing, I'm sure. Something else to help with that though is this. Peering through the steel beams here, this week we could see brand new elevators. These are the same brand as the ones installed within the launch towers and have two bays, one on either side. Interestingly, nearby, just in front of the SpaceX office and apartment buildings, looks to be getting cleared out. The mobile homes that sat here just a few weeks ago were shipped away and the ground is being torn up. We're all wondering if this may be for a brand new, larger rocket garden of sorts. I think it would be pretty neat if at some point they made a dedicated display for their super heavy Booster 12 like they had done with Falcon 9. Perhaps instead though, it may be used as a space to store regular vehicles vertically awaiting flight. What do you think? Moving on to the Masseys site, this week it has been an interesting one. We've had testing on both the S39.1 and B18.3 units. SpaceX started the week strong here with two cryo tests on the S39.1. The first was here on Sunday and it was filled with cryogenic liquid from 6 PM all the way through to 2 AM. At this point, we suspect they had begun pushing and pulling on that thrust puck to simulate the forces of and beyond the expected flight limits. All must have looked well because they were back on Monday at about the same time with the same duration testing campaign, so all is good on the ship testing side so far it seems. Once this test was done, SpaceX published a road closure to roll the cryo stand back to the launch site, which Shaun was there to watch pass by. The news, however, doesn't seem quite so good for the B18.3 testing tank. On Wednesday, SpaceX filled this test article with cryogenic liquid, and remember, this article is designed to pull down and test the new generation interstage rather than the old temporary hot stage ring design that SpaceX had been using between Starship Flight 2 and Starship Flight 11. Sadly, this ended up failing along the common dome here during its first known compression test. That is clearly obvious by the visible cloud of ice which rapidly falls here. Keeping track of everything going on these days seems like a full-time job. It feels like we spend half our lives online, but the resources going into tracking us is mind-boggling. Try searching your own name and see what comes up. You'll probably find personal details staring right back at you. Ideally, you don't want that information out there for the taking, and that is where Delete Me, the sponsor of this video, comes in. It's a service that quietly works in the background to clean up personal information that is being collected by data brokers and then sold off to large companies trying to target you. These groups scrape up as much information on you as they can and make it available for anyone willing to pay. Whoever ends up with these databases can use those for targeted advertising, spam, scams, and even identity fraud. That is what is so great about Delete Me, because they will send you an initial report showing what they've uncovered and what they are already working on removing. They continue scanning and clearing your data on an ongoing basis. In fact, this recent Wirecutter review tested 9 different services and concluded that Delete Me is the best option for most people, earning it their top recommendation. They've already removed over 100 million personal listings, so they clearly know their stuff. You can also cover your entire family. That means with the one subscription, you can protect all of your loved ones. You can manage their privacy settings individually or give family members their own logins if they prefer to handle things themselves. Since I've started using it, I've noticed a definite drop in nuisance targeted communications. So check it out using my link joindeleteme.com/Marcus for a 20% discount on US consumer plans. The URL for international plans is also right there in the description. Thank you, Delete Me. So back to the B18.3 testing tank rupture situation, we have been able to get in much closer to explore what happened. From the ground shots, some rows of stringers have obviously come off with a gash here in the side. All of this is just testing hardware, of course, and there is always a chance that this was an initial test to find a failure point. However, it seems odd that this would have been pushed that far on the first big test. Regardless, it wasn't the hot stage truss that failed, which I'm sure is a key part of what they are trying to push through the expected limits, so there is that. We're wondering if SpaceX may just repair this damage and try again, given that this is just a test unit, or if they will build a new unit mostly from scratch to continue this testing run. There are some grid fin pieces being stored in the Sanchez area right now, which were recently painted. We were thinking that these would be used on this same test tank at some point, so it feels like there is certainly a lot more that SpaceX wants to test here. Now, we have also got some new updates around Florida thanks to the awesome Greg Scott. Check out the left side of the Gigabay, which is now 4 levels high, which has that a full level taller than the one at Texas. Notice the lack of the 6 side entrances though. With no Star Factory here at this location, there really is no need for them to have this opened up yet, as they can always open it up at a later date. Over here, all the 9 tower sections remain patiently waiting for the work at Space Launch Complex 37 to get to a point where these can roll over. The lower sections of the tower are still being outfitted with all of their walkways and commodity lines. We can also see the arms and carriage destined for that same tower are still being worked on. The end piece of the ship quick disconnect arm, which is the final piece to roll out for Launch Complex 39A tower, still lacks quite a bit of hardware right now, so that won't be moving for quite a while it seems. Moving over to that launch complex though, we can see that this has its actuator already installed for this ship quick disconnect, and work on the orbital launch mount below has clamp arms still being installed. From this distance, it's hard to keep track of how many have gone in at this point, but it's coming along nicely. You can see that the commodities farm that will feed this beast is pretty crowded now. The majority of the water, cryogenic and high pressure gas lines that head towards the launch mount and tower are installed. Moving right over to Space Launch Complex 37 that we mentioned last week though, we can now confirm that pile drilling had indeed begun on the first of the 2 brand new launch towers and stands being constructed here. The gigantic LR13000 crane was still laying down here in pieces, and that will obviously rise quickly once the tower sections roll in to be stacked. If the process is anything like Starbase in Texas, that should be within the next few months. Just before moving on, a quick glance as well thanks to Greg over at Space Launch Complex 40 that we watch launching Falcon 9s so frequently these days. SpaceX recently built a giant new landing pad to replace their previous landing zones used in Florida for retirement. In fact, the first landing here should actually be with the upcoming Crew 12 launch, which is currently scheduled for February 15 after that early return of Crew 11. So it's going to be fun watching the camera work on that landing. As always, terrific to have these sorts of views over the sites at Florida. So if you love all this stuff and want access to these images to check them out yourself, check him out there on Patreon and follow along. Now, just as our episode went live last Saturday, NASA's crawler transporter with the Artemis II space launch system here left the vehicle assembly building and began the rollout to the launch pad. It hurtled along at a cracking speed of 0.82 miles per hour, and after its tedious 4-mile trek, it rolled up the ramp at 39B, entering the evening after this 12-hour journey. I thought it was worth making this time-lapse out of NASA's stream footage here. It was only 720p, but kind of cool watching it all sped up there. As you can see from the map here, it needs to head right down past the turnoff to pad 39A. That's where SpaceX is finishing off its Starship Tower. There's often confusion in the comments with people thinking 39A and B are both the same launch site, but no, they are very different and separated by a little over 1.5 miles. I think it's really neat how the crawler keeps the platform above perfectly level as it is rolling up the ramp to that launch pad. Greg Scott, of course, took the opportunity to snap a few neat shots of it from the air as well, so it's quite wonderful seeing it out in all its glory. With the SLS now at the pad, the team have begun the preparations with a bunch of tests lined up, such as the crew access arm mechanisms. There will be a full emergency evacuation test with the entire crew, and so much more as we lead up to the final wet dress rehearsal, hopefully coming in a little over a week's time. That's currently planned for February 2, but that's obviously based on how well all the tests go up to that point. Everybody is getting super excited for it now as the reality is dawning on people that we have astronauts visiting the moon for the first time in over 53 years. On the massive solid rocket boosters on the side, you'll notice the giant America 250 logo painted on to celebrate the 250th anniversary of the USA for 2026. Considering this rocket is made by many manufacturers and engineers across the states, that's very cool. In flight, those SRBs separate first, of course, leaving the bulk of the rocket to continue on its way. That massive orange center core stage with 4 highly efficient RS-25 engines burning hydrogen and oxygen will take it the rest of the way to orbit, although at stage separation it does remain a tad low so that the spent core stage is set for a quick, safe disposal back into the atmosphere. At the top of the core stage, you will notice that it tapers in, housing the interim cryogenic propulsion stage, or ICPS. You'll see loads of images published by United Launch Alliance, who of course makes this stage, so here are a few of them. This has a single RL-10 engine, again using hydrogen and oxygen. Right up top is the 4 crew strapped into Orion, and this is going to orbit Earth twice to ensure that all systems are working as expected while still close to home. This is an elliptical orbit, of course, with the lowest point being only 115 miles or 185 kilometers. At its highest point, 1,400 miles or just over 2,250 kilometers. After everything is checked out and the first orbit is done, the ICPS will fire up to raise Orion to a high Earth orbit. This second, much longer orbit will take almost a full day at around 23.5 hours. Yes, this has Artemis II's apogee extended way out now at 46,000 miles or 74,000 kilometers above Earth. Orion with the service module can now separate from the upper stage, but that ICPS will still have one final use before it is disposed of. The crew will actually be using this as a target for control tests and a proximity demonstration. NASA will monitor Orion as the astronauts then switch the spacecraft to manual mode and use its onboard cameras and the view from the spacecraft's windows to line up with the ICPS. This is going to look really cool, and I'm just praying that we get to have beautiful, clean 4K footage of all of this sent back home to watch in real time. Picture this, they will approach and back away from the stage to assess Orion's handling, and while doing all that, they'll have tested and recorded all of the data needed for any future improvements to the system. It is critical, of course, for future missions that need to dock and undock with the lunar lander for Artemis III. This idea is kind of reminiscent of a few of the Apollo missions too. Orion's controls will then be given back to NASA's mission controllers, and for the remainder of the orbit, they'll continue verifying the spacecraft. The crew can then ditch the spacesuits worn for launch and can spend the rest of the in-space mission in plain clothes, which would be pretty welcomed at this point. The suits only need to be put back on for the final plunge into the atmosphere. Reed Wiseman, Victor Glover, Christina Cook and Jeremy Hansen will make up an extraordinary crew, and although I'm not going to go into a great deal of detail again, if you are unfamiliar, go and read up on all the bios. Reed Wiseman as commander is a 27-year Navy veteran and pilot. He's been an astronaut since 2009, having already done extensive time on the International Space Station. Victor Glover is the pilot for Artemis II, of course, and was a crew member of Expedition 64, serving as a station systems flight engineer. Christina Cook is mission specialist, an electrical engineer, Antarctic explorer, firefighter, and also broke the record for longest continuous time in space by a woman back in 2020. We then have Jeremy Hansen, a Canadian astronaut in the second mission specialist role. He's been a pilot for the Royal Canadian Air Force, a physicist, an aquanaut, and then went on to become the first Canadian astronaut to lead a NASA astronaut class. For Jeremy though, this is going to be his very first actual space flight. Not a bad way to spend your first space mission, being one of the first to circle the moon in well over half a century. Yes, this is really an epic crew, and I'm so excited to see them sharing everything in a few weeks' time. Of course, while still relatively close to Earth, they will collectively assess how well all of the life support systems are working in varying situations. It's much bigger than the Apollo capsule, of course, but here they want to ensure that it cleans the air and processes water vapour correctly when the crew are not just breathing normally, but also exercising. All those life support systems need to perfectly balance no matter what is going on inside. Obviously, all the communication and navigation systems will be tested out at the same time. The Deep Space Network specifically needs to be in clear communication in order to get the bandwidth needed to talk and stream imagery back home from this distance. With everything tested, it is indeed time for the trans-lunar injection burn. The ICPS, having already done most of the work to put Orion on the course for the moon, has separated away, but the ICPS will burn its engines to place it into a graveyard orbit, and it will also deploy its rideshare CubeSats on board around this time too. Meanwhile, the European Service Module is now providing that final push. This will extend that orbit right up, raising it over 230,000 miles or 370,000 kilometres. It might seem like a lot of propellant is still needed for this, but because this is initiated from the high Earth orbit, when I calculate this, it only seems to be a little over 330 meters per second of extra velocity needed. With that done, Orion and the service module are now on an outbound trip lasting almost 4 days. On the remainder of the trip comes all the wonderful views and tests that we have been dreaming of. Humans for the first time in well over half a century sharing live views from their perspective of the far side of the moon. They'll be demonstrating Earth departure and return operation simulations and emergency procedures showing the process testing out the radiation shelter. They will end up about 4,700 miles or 7,500 kilometres beyond the far side of the moon, so they'll be able to see both Earth and the moon in tandem from within Orion's windows. It's going to be absolutely magic, and before we know it, they'll have looped around and silently fallen all the way back to Earth in what they call the free return trajectory. With the entire mission lasting about 10 days, they'll separate the Orion capsule and enter the atmosphere at a blistering 25,000 miles or 40,000 kilometres per hour. Orion itself will experience temperatures around 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit or 1650 Celsius, and communications with the crew will be blocked by the plasma during that phase of the entry. NASA are not doing a skip entry like they did with Artemis I, so they're coming right in this time. The cover that has been protecting its forward bay is separated off to make way for the parachutes to deploy and begin slowing Orion down, followed by 2 drogue parachutes at 25,000 feet. That is then followed by the 3 main parachutes under 10,000 feet, so that the splashdown speed is reduced right down to about 17 miles per hour. I am just so excited to see all of this play out, and make sure to share this massive event with family and friends that are perhaps unaware of what is going on here in potentially a few weeks. I cannot wait. Now, while on the topic of the moon, another neat update on Blue Origin's Blue Moon Mark 1 lander. Early in the week, it had already left for the port to be shipped off to Houston. They've now given the lander an official name, Endurance, which is named after Ernest Shackleton's legendary ship that journeyed to Earth's South Pole. So yeah, that's a neat way to honour that legacy, I think. This time though, it'll be the South Pole of the moon. We had Had a string of rapid Falcon 9 launches this week too, along with all the other excitement. Just as we were exporting last week's video out, SpaceX sent another classified payload to orbit with the NROL-105 mission. Booster 1100 had launched from Vandenberg to deploy this covert batch of satellites into orbit. As far as we can tell, it seems to have been another batch of Starshield spacecraft, although that is of course unconfirmed officially. About 8 minutes after liftoff, with the booster on a return to launch site mission, touched down here at Landing Zone 4. This was a great milestone too, as it was Falcon's 600th mission. On Sunday evening across the country, Starlink Group 6100 was away as the unsettled weather in Florida made it look a little uncertain. No problem though with Booster 1080 on its 24th flight, delivering 29 satellites into the network, landing shortly of course on the drone ship A Shortfall of Gravitas. That just left one more midweek with Starlink Group 1730 back at Vandenberg again. Flight 10 for Booster 1093, and of course I still love you out there as the landing platform. We've also had Rocket Lab's first Electron launch of the year. Yes, they've kicked off 2026 in style, carrying 2 satellites for European space company Open Cosmos. Just over an hour after liftoff, Electron's kickstage precisely released both spacecraft into a high circular orbit. Now we've got some updates from VAST and their works for the exciting Haven 1 space station mission. We had already seen them testing out their primary flight structure last year. This is now fully complete and even passed all of its acceptance tests. VAST is currently in the clean room with the primary structure, integrating the thermal control system, propulsion, interior shells, avionics, and all sorts of stuff. Once the station is in fully flight-ready configuration, they then need to go through a full environmental testing campaign at NASA's Armstrong testing facility before they are go for launch. Yes, it does sound like there is still a lot of work to go, right? Well, sadly, we had been hoping to see the mission this year, but as stated here, it won't be launching until the first quarter of 2027 at this point. Safety comes first, so as with any space mission, delays do tend to creep in along the way. We'll just need to be a little bit more patient. So there we have it, my friends. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, don't forget to hit subscribe so we get to keep making them. If you want to continue with more space goodness, you are going to totally love this one right here. Thanks for watching all this way through. As always, I will see you all in the next video.